There is a Sikha from the previous Rebbe, from the Rebbe Rashab, from the previous Rebbe's father, which is quite famous, and also a serious Sikha. And that is the Sikha that is known as the Kol HaYetzel L'Milchames Beis David, which is a discussion which the Rebbe Rashab held on Simchas Torah, Tafresh Samach Aleph, I believe the year 1900, where in effect he articulates the mission statement of the yeshiva's Temchei Tmimim, why he made the yeshiva, what's the criteria of a tamim, what he expects from the bachrim, and so on. The Sikha is printed in Sefer HaSichos Tafshin Beis, the previous Rebbe Sichos from the year 1942. It's quite long, and I'm certain it's translated into English, I just don't know where. The Sikha touches on many things. One of the things that the Sikha touches on is learning Torah with the sense that behind the Torah is God. When a person learns Torah and has a difficulty with the Torah, he's not that bright. So there's a struggle, there's a yagiyah, there's hard work in trying to understand it and to retain it. So that's awesome. It awes, it humbles the person. But when a person is very bright and they're able to master the Torah, they can reach a place of relationship with Torah that they don't see intellectually the difference between the Torah and, say, physics or chemistry or mathematics. There are different criteria for how it's interpreted, for how it's learned, and how you research it, and how you make innovations or discoveries. But it's a body of knowledge, an intellectual knowledge, that if a person is intelligent enough, they can master. And the previous Rebbe quotes his father, who of course is underscoring the idea that Torah is Ein Sof, it's godliness, and ultimately it's infinite. But for the more intelligent people to appreciate the Ein Sof, the infinity of the Torah, and the godliness of the Torah, there needs to be a certain humility. In other words, when a person is really intelligent, they are unusually at risk of forgetting the Kedushas HaTorah, the holiness of the Torah, and so on. And to be sure, when a person forgets that, they actually deprive themselves of its infinity. Their ego can actually not only limit themselves, but limit the Torah to which they have a relationship with. And the Rebbe talks very powerfully about how that's one of the Hasidic priorities, that when a person learns Torah, there should be God in the Torah. And as a result, it's learned with the proper humility, with the proper bittul, and of course, learned in such a way that one is open, whether intellectually or spiritually, to the Ein Sof of the Torah. In that Sikh, he tells a story that happened when the Alter Rebbe was a very young man. The Alter Rebbe was newly married, living in Vitebsk. He had married a Vitebsker girl, and he joined an elite in Vitebsk at that time. You're talking now 1760, 1761, 1762. There was an elite of Talmidei Chacham in Vitebsk who were incredibly well-schooled, great Lamdim, great Go'enim. And the Alter Rebbe was a very, very young man. He was 15 years old, 16 years old, and he joined this group. And they really quickly recognized his genius, his incredible mind, and he was embraced and included in this, so to speak, inner circle of scholars in spite of his youth. And then Rebbe tells a story that there was a man who was called Rebbe Elisha Ga'an HaGo'enim. Rebbe Elisha Ga'an HaGo'enim was much older than the Alter Rebbe. He was a sage, he was an old man, while the Alter Rebbe was a young man. And he was actually related, he was an uncle or a great uncle of Yehuda Leib Segel, the Alter Rebbe's father-in-law. And he was one of the people who tested the Alter Rebbe to determine that he was a suitable son-in-law for Rabbi Yehuda Leib Segel. So he was involved with the Alter Rebbe, he was involved with the Alter Rebbe's Shidduch, and he knew the Alter Rebbe's Lamdas, and so on. And there was an occasion when they were learning a Gemara in Erevin, and there was a difficult shtikele Gemara, and the question went around amongst this elite Talmidei Chachamim. The Alter Rebbe gave his interpretation, Most of the other Lomdim agreed with the Alter Rebbe. This Rebbe Elisha Ga'an HaGoinim, who the previous Rebbe said would refer to himself as Goan Uparish, had a different interpretation. And Rebbe Elisha was criticized. Understand that he must have been an old man, he wasn't a youngster. But the other Gedolim, the other Goinim in that community, in that Chabura, objected. And the reason they objected was because his interpretation was inconsistent with the Rishonim, with Rashi, with Tosfos. He was giving interpretation on the Gemara, which is original. And he was very disturbed by the fact, first of all, that they sided with someone so much younger than he was, the Alter Rebbe. And moreover, why was he not entitled to give his own interpretation? He quoted Maamar Chazal that underscore the idea that every generation has its own go'inim, its own scholars, its own interpreters of Torah, and so forth. So the previous Rebbe tells the following. There was a man living in Vitebsk whose name was Rebbe Ephraim. Rebbe Ephraim was the uncle of Rebbe Mendel HaRadoker. Rebbe Mendel HaRadoker was a Gon and a Chassid and a Tzaddik and a Rebbe. He was actually the Alter Rebbe's third Rebbe. Alter Rebbe had three Rebbes. The Maggid of Mezritch, his son Rebbe Avram the Malach, Rebbe Avram the Angel, and his third Rebbe was Rebbe Mendel Vitebsker. His uncle was Rebbe Ephraim. Rebbe Mendel Vitebsker, his name was Rebbe Moshe, his brother was Rebbe Ephraim. Ephraim was himself a great Gon and a great Makubal and a great Tzaddik and a great Chassid. And although he was connected to the Baal Shem Tov, even the Baal Shem Tov's opponents respected him. So when this event occurred, and Rebbe Elisha felt so insulted by the way the other members of this group of Talmidei Chachamim, of Go'inim, had responded to him, he approached Rebbe Ephraim and he complained. And I forgot to mention, by the way, the reason Rebbe Ephraim was so respected, including by the Misnagdim, was because he was Midas HaEmes. He couldn't lie. Everybody knew he said the truth. So Rebbe Elisha Ga'an HaGo'inim, also known as Rebbe Elisha Gaon Uparish, approaches Rebbe Ephraim, the brother of Rebbe Moshe, the father of Menachem Mendel of Haradak. And he says, I object. Every generation has its own Talmidei Chachamim, who are entitled to interpret the Torah their own way. Rashi has his interpretation, Tosfos has his interpretation, Rambam his interpretation, Rabbit has his interpretation, and Elisha Gaon Uparish has his own. So Rebbe Ephraim answered with his midas ha'emes. He wasn't trying to insult him. He simply said it the way he saw it. We find a pasuk in Tanakh that describes the Torah as Vehi Megillah Ksuva Ponim V'Yachar. The Torah is a scroll which is written with a front and a back, a pnimius and a cheteris, a front and a rear. He says, you're right. Rashi has a pshat, Tosfos has a pshat, the Rambam has a pshat, the Rabbi has a pshat. But the pshatim of the Rishonim come from the Shivim Ponim of the Torah, come from 70 faces of the Torah. Your pshat, your interpretation comes from the Shivim Acherayim, from the 70 rears in the back of the Torah. And again, he wasn't trying to insult him, he was simply telling him the truth as he saw it. This is a story. I probably told the story before, perhaps not with so much detail, but I've certainly discussed many times in the past the meaning behind the story, the spirit of the story, the neshama of the story. The spirit of the story is as follows. Torah has a face and a rear, a ponim and acherayim. The face of the Torah, the pnimius of Torah, is godliness, is Ein Sof. The rear, the acherayim, the back of the Torah is wisdom, is intellect, is seichel. In other words, a person who has a greater Ruach HaKodesh can open up a Sefer Torah and see immediately what Torah wants, and he won't necessarily need to delve so deeply into asking questions and giving answers intellectually, although he's learning Torah intellectually, but his superior sensitivity to the Oyer HaTorah, to the light of the Torah, to the face of the Torah, makes his delving into the Acherayim, the Torah, very, very, very limited. I heard once that the Rebbe said that in the time of the first Beis HaMikdash, people used the Sefer Torah like a Shulchan Aruch. You open up a Sefer Torah and paskin a shahada. How could you possibly use the Sefer Torah like a Shulchan Aruch? Sefer Torah is so vague. And of course the answer is, when you have greater Ruach HaKodesh, you don't need to ask questions and give answers. You have clarity from the outset. And this is a very sensitive issue. Now, of course, ultimately it's a sensitive issue on a faith level. We believe the Torah comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We believe the Torah is not like other Chochmah. It's not physics, chemistry, biology, social science. It's God's infinite wisdom. And more importantly, not only is the Torah God's infinite wisdom, but God wrote himself into his wisdom. And as a consequence, when one learns Torah, he's holding HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem and his Torah are one. And when one is holding Chochmas Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he's holding HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'chvei v'yatzmei. That's what Rabbi says in Tanya, that this is the greatest unity that could possibly be between a human being. And godliness is when he's learning Torah because he's makef v'mukaf, like it says in Tanya chapter 5. So written into the Torah is the godliness. So on a basic level, this is an issue of faith. But on a more involved level, this is an issue of experience. That means to say, people like me and like you, most of us, are not sensitive to Ruach HaKodesh, to light. We're fortunate if we understand some of the ideas. So for us, it's a question of faith. But greater people, purer people, who lived in earlier times, and in Torah and in Likutei Torah, as you'll see momentarily, this is especially true of the era of the first Beis HaMikdash. They were sensitive to the Oyer, to the Ruach HaKodesh, to the spirituality, to the holiness of the Torah. And there was a much stronger link between their panim and their acharayim, between their face and their rear, between their intellectual understanding and their godly enlightenment and experience, which of course made their Torah incredibly rich. Now, it could get problematic. It could become a problem. It could work against you, this idea of being so sensitive that your intellectual understanding and your spiritual enlightenment are so close. And I'll share with you a vart and a story, which I believe I've also shared with you in the past, but I guess it's not that much of a sin to repeat. Rabbi Isaac Homler was a great chassid. The Fidik calls him Gon Ha'amiti Isha Ashkeles. He was an incredibly great chassid. And he was a chassid of three Lubavitcher Rabbis, the Alter Rebbe, the Middle Rebbe, and the Rebbe the Tzemach Tzedek, Rabbi Ezel. And of course, we know a lot about Rabbi Isaac Homler from the Sichos of the previous Rebbe and the letters, but we also know a lot about Rabbi Isaac Homler from Rabbi Zalman Duchman's Sefer, L'Shema Eisen, because Rabbi Zalman Duchman was makabel from his grandfather, Rabbi Mordechai Yael, who was Pashat a Talmud of Rabbi Isaac Homler. So there's a lot of stories there. Eliyahu and Gerari gave out a biography of Rabbi Isaac Homler. You can read whatever we know about him in this book. Rabbi Isaac Homler was quoted as saying that the Alter Rebbe had Ruach HaKodesh all the time. The Middle Rebbe had Ruach HaKodesh whenever he wanted. And the Tzemach Tzedek has Ruach HaKodesh la'isman ha'itim, on occasion. So he said this when the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, was already Rebbe. That the Alter Rebbe had Ruach HaKodesh all the time. The Middle had Ruach HaKodesh whenever he wanted it. And the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, had Ruach HaKodesh on occasion. So of course, the young, hot-blooded Chassidim were ready to rip him apart limb from limb. By the way, this is not written in the story. This is just my surmise. Because he was placing the Tzemach Tzedek on a lower level than the Middle Rebbe and the Alter Rebbe. So he immediately qualified, quote, Amol is beser nish tab Ruach HaKodesh. Sometimes it's preferred not to have Ruach HaKodesh. Yeah. So there's a story. I'll actually tell you two stories. One story the Rebbe told by Fabrengen, more than once. And the Rebbe told the story in a favorable way, which was very interesting because we know how sensitive and ideal the Rebbe is about the idea of a Rebbe, of a Nossi. And yet in this story he seems to accept an argument of a Chassid that allows a Chassid to disagree with his Rebbe about Pshat and a Maimer. The story is that the Rebbe the Tzemach Tzedek said a Maimer. And of course, after the Maimer was said, the Chassidim studied, they reviewed them. They would call it Chazering the Maimer. So all the Chassidim gathered, and there was Chazorah. And of course, at that time you had the great Chassidim of the Rebbe the Tzemach Tzedek, led, of course, by the Tzemach Tzedek's own children, and then the big Rabbonim of Russia. And Rabbi Hillel Parashah was there as well. And they did Chazorah, and they reviewed the Maimer, and they got to a certain point, and they debated what the Rebbe meant, Pshat in the Maimer. So the Tzemach Tzedek's children all agreed to one Pshat, and Rabbi Hillel Parashah disagreed with them. And they argued very passionately until it was decided that they'll go to the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek himself, and they'll ask him to tell them what he meant. The Baal HaMaimed, the Maimed comes from him. So they came to the Tzemach Tzedek, they presented the question. Of course, they didn't tell him who said what. They simply said there's an argument going on, and they asked the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, his opinion. So the Tzemach Tzedek sided with his children against Rabbi Hillel. So the Tzemach Tzedek's son said, Rabbi Hillel, no, concede, admit. Rabbi Hillel says, no, I still say my pshat is correct. And they said, how could you say your pshat is correct? This is the Baal HaMaimed. So the Tzemach, Rabbi Hillel Parashah said, when the Rebbe says Chassidis, it's Schneur medaberes meteich grene. When a Rebbe speaks Chassidus, the Eibishter speaking through his mouth. In other words, it's Ruach HaKodesh, which is the source of his seichel. Then he learns the Maimer. Just like I have an obligation to learn a Chassidus, and you have an obligation to learn a Chassidus, so does the Rebbe. The fact that it's his own Chassidus doesn't matter, because when he said it, it was the words of God, Kvayachol, and now he's studying it as a student of Torah. And as a student of Torah, I am entitled to disagree with him. He understands it intellectually one way, I understand it intellectually another way. In other words, there's an impasse of Pnimius and Chitonius, Oyer and Seichel, Ruach HaKodesh and Chochmah. And the Bible says when you separate Ruach HaKodesh from the Chochmah, we can disagree. And then the second story, which is also famous, and I've told it to you certainly, is the Maisa with the Rebbe Rashab and the Chaim Ber. The Rebbe Rashab was a young Rebbe, very young Rebbe, who was abandoned by most of his Chassidim. They all ran off to Kapust and so on. So the few Lubavitcher Chassidim, whatever the numbers were incredibly dedicated. They loved him and they respected him, and they're trying to build him up, so to speak, to boost him. And they were very supportive. They were very dedicated to Lubavitch. So the Rebbe Rashab was learning the Imrei Bina, which is my mother from the middle of Rebbe, very deep, scholarly my mother from the middle of Rebbe. And he wrote a letter to a chassid living in Kremenchuk, a famous chassid by the name of Rabbi Chaim Ber Vilensky, who was a gaon. He was an incredible mind. There's a sefer called Chassidim HaRishonim, I believe, and you can read at length his biography. The reason his biography is so long, because it's based in part on a record that his own son wrote down and sent to the previous Rebbe yet in the 30s, by the Rebbe's request. So the Rebbe Rashab was learning Imrei Bina, which is the most difficult Chassidus of the middle of Rebbe. He was having difficulty. So he wrote a letter to Rabbi Chaim Ber Vilensky asking him for pshat, to explain it to him. And Rabbi Chaim Ber did not explain it to him. He's going to explain to Rebbe a meaning of a Maimed. And that's the way the story ended. The Kremenchuga Rov was Rabbi Yitzchak Rafalovich. He visited Lubavitch and he went into the Rebbe Rashab in Yechidus. And the Rebbe Rashab tells him, he tells him, it's a strange thing. I sent Rabbi Chaim Ber a letter and he did not respond. Now the Kremenchuga Rov, Rabbi Yitzchak Rafalovich was a chassid. He was a young chassid. So when the Rebbe tells us to him, he didn't think too much. And as soon as he came home to Kremenchuk, he immediately went to Rabbi Chaim Ber's house, and he opens up the door and he starts to shout and scream. The Rebbe writes you a letter and you ignore him. In general, to ignore the Rebbe's letter is rude, but especially under those conditions. So Rabbi Chaim Ber says to Rabbi Yitzchak Rafalovich, after he ranted and raved and carried on and he finished, ran out of gas, he says, did the Rebbe tell you what letter I ignored? Did he tell you what he wrote to me in the letter? So Rabbi Yitzchak Rafalovich says, no. He says, well, I'll tell you. He asked me pshat and a maimer in Imrei Bina. And Rabbi Yitzchak and Rabbi Chaim Ber said to him, quote, he'll figure it out without my help. He doesn't need me to help. And of course, once Rabbi Yitzchak Rafalovich heard what the issue was, he understood why he didn't answer the questions. Somehow, this exchange between Rabbi Yitzchak Rafalovich and Rabbi Chaim Ber reached the Rebbe Rashab. On the next visit of Rabbi Chaim Ber Vilensky to Lubavitch, he was in the Chabadnitze, in the Cheder Sheni, in the small additional room where the people who Marich and Betfila, who daven long, would sit. And the Rebbe Rashab went into the other room to watch him daven. The Rebbe Rashab went to watch Rabbi Chaim Ber daven. And he stood, I think, for half an hour watching him daven. Watching him. Rabbi Chaim Ber had no idea he was there. And then the Rebbe Rashab said, quote, is gerecht. Ich habe gewollt aber sehen, Zido, mit Seichel allein kann man durchgehen. which means in English, he's right, I didn't need him to help me with the interpretation of the Maamar. But I wanted to see if this particular point can be understood only intellectually, or it requires Ruach HaKodesh, in effect. And he concluded that by watching Reb Chaim Ber daven, he decided that we can mitzeichel came durch, then you can understand it intellectually. It's a very subtle story. What's the pshat? A Rebbe learns a Maamar. A Rebbe has a problem. What's his problem? He has Ruach HaKodesh, the lights are on. So he's not sure, do I understand it or do I see it? Now if a person sees Getlachkeit, it's a wonderful thing, but that's not Torah, that's not learning Torah, which is a mitzvah. It's only Torah if it's intellectual, if you understand it. But the Rebbe doesn't know, do I understand it, do I see it? So he asks a chassid. The chassid he knows does not have Ruach HaKodesh. If the chassid understands it, that means he also understands it. But if the chassid cannot understand it, he cannot know about himself whether this idea appeals to him because he understands it intellectually or because it has a Ruach HaKodesh. That's the nature of the interplay between Ponim and Acharaim, the face and the back of Torah. Now I want you to haltkop. I want to go a little bit deeper into this. And I want you to pay attention because it's a little bit sensitive. We have this interplay between what we would call in our culture oir and seichel, ponim and acheraim, light and ideas. There is a certain place where the convergence of oir and seichel is perfect. There's a lot of godliness and there's enough room for ideas. There is a certain place where there is so much godliness, there's no room for ideas. And of course, there's certainly a place where there's no godliness and all there is ideas. And if I had to categorize these three things, I would call it the Luchei Sabris, the tablets of the covenant, the Torah Shebaksav, the written Torah, and the Torah Shebapeh, the oral Torah. In the Luchei Sabris, there's so much oyer, there's no room for seichel. There's so much godliness, there's nothing to understand. The Torah Shebaksav is ponim v'achar, as a front and a back. So you have oyer and seichel. And of course, in Torah Shebalpeh, which we have in the Mishnah and the Gemara and so on, you have Seichel HaTorah, you have Chachmasei Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you have the intellect, you have the wisdom of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but the light is diminished, the light is gone. So what would happen if a person would get an idea of Torah that comes directly from Kesser? That comes directly from the level higher than Atzilus. In other words, it comes from the level which is more or less the Madrega of the Luchas. And I'll repeat my question in other words. If there is this interplay between face and rear, Oyer and Seichel, Ruach HaKodesh and Chachma, on one level, and on a higher level, you cannot have both. So what were to happen if there would be a divine revelation from the level of Torah where the godliness is so predominant that there cannot be any interplay, there cannot be any sharing of oyer and seichel, ideas and godliness, ponim and acheraim. If there were to be a revelation of Torah from the level which is higher than the Sefer Torah, higher than Atzilus, higher than the level where godliness and seichel somehow manage to cohabit, to coexist, you could only have one of two extremes. Either there would be so much godliness there'd be nothing to understand, or you would only understand it and not know the godliness at all. You would only understand it and not know the godliness at all. Now you should know that what I'm trying to describe to you is discussed in Tanya in the letters 29, the Gersa Kedesh Chav Tes, which is about halachas, and you have it also in the Likutei Amorim, I believe, in Perek Nun Aleph or Nun Beis. And perhaps it exists in a third place as well. And what it says there, it's against the Kedesh Tes, against the Kedesh Tes also. It says there's halachas are called Neivas Chachma Shel Maila. Dinim, laws, how we do mitzvahs, is the fallout of this madrega, What are halachas? Laws, dinim. Laws tell us how to live our life practically. Laws are dry. Laws don't even have much of seichel, idea, let alone godliness. But the principle is that halachas, ha-Torah, come from keser Torah. They come from the crown. They come from the highest level. Because they come from the highest level, the godliness and the reason cannot have any balance. If there's going to be a revelation of godliness, there'd be no reason, there'd be no reality to it, down here in other words. And if it's going to be brought down to a level where we can practically apply it, the godliness is going to be altogether hidden, lost. Because when the godliness is too strong, you cannot have this balance between ponim and acherayim that you have in the world of Atzilus, that you have in Chassidishe Parsha and so forth. The Maamar in front of us will be discussing the idea that I just introduced. It's not a long Maamar. But our Maamar is not going to be dealing with dinim, our Maamar is going to be dealing with the Rabbanans, with chumris and syogim the Rabbanan. All of the rabbinic ordinances of the various different types. The rabbis in the time of the second Beis HaMikdash made all kinds of edicts, decrees, asu, siyog, la Torah, they made fences around the Torah, many things which were biblically permitted, the rabbis outlawed, many things which biblically was much more liberal and fluid and flexible. The Chachamim later on fixed it, they made it more rigid, more exact, more demanding, what you must do and what you're not allowed to do, and so forth. Now you have to understand that Chassidus sees everything through a prism of Chassidus. When the Chachamim come along, when the rabbis come along, and they add an enactment, a decree. Now, of course, what's the simple way of understanding this? The simple way of understanding is the rabbi saw there was a certain neglect. The rabbi saw there was a certain breakdown of the sensitivity that people had to Torah and mitzvahs. So they were extra strict. They put up a fence. And by putting up a fence, so if people would violate, they would violate the fence, and the Torah itself would remain intact. In other words, to a person without a Hasidic discipline, the rabbinic enactments and ordinances and chumris and gezeres and takonis and so on are outside of the Torah that God gave us. The rabbis did certain things to preserve the Torah that the Eibishter gave us. You see, but Chassidus disagrees with that. Categorically and absolutely. Chassidus holds that if a rabbi makes a decree that's not a part of Torah, it isn't Torah, it's superstition, it's Shagas. In other words, a chumrah, a strictness in Torah has to have a basis in Torah. You can't just make them up because you're in the mood or because you think it's justified. It has to have a basis in Torah. In other words, Rabbi say, Torah is first of all godliness, and second of all intellectualism. It's first of all pnimius, and second of all chitzedius. First of all light, and then ideas. The Torah on the highest levels incorporates within itself not only the 613 mitzvahs as they're written in the Chassidishe Parsha, but any gzeira and any chumrah, any takon, any enactment that any rabbi will ever make, if it's Torah semes, if it's really Torah and divinely inspired, is a part of the original Torah, which the Eibishter gave us. He's not enhancing the Torah. He's simply revealing more of it, but he's revealing it from a much higher level. How high a level is it? And the answer is very plain, that the rabbinic takonos reveal Torah from such a high level that it's either or. Either they're completely godly, in which case we don't have them, or all we have is a rule or an instruction or a decree, and the godliness behind it is lost. This is called Divrei Seifim, the words of the rabbis. The words of the rabbis, according to Kabbalah and Pnimius HaTorah, according to Chassidus, are part of the Eibishter's original gift. They come from godliness, they come out level of intellect. But the gezeres and the chumris are coming from such a high level that the way they come down to us, all we have is a logical explanation. This is protecting you from this. The godliness hidden behind it cannot possibly be revealed because the godliness and the intellectualism are so potent that they cannot have harmony. They're incompatible. While in Chassidishe Parsha, that harmony can exist. So let us now begin to read the Maamar with all of this background. And of course, we're going to begin with line 1. What we learned thus far, I believe, is quite clear. I introduced the Maamar to the best of my limited abilities. And in essence, what I'm trying to communicate to you is that when rabbis add things to the Torah, they're not adding to the Torah. They're culling it out of the Torah, but from such a high level that it leaps. In other words, when it comes to us, we get only the very periphery of it, the chitzonius, the achirayim, and the pnimius cannot come down. It's too high. So the Rebbe begins on line 1, Veshoma Aviha Nidra. This week's parsha is, of course, about vows, nedarim, and the idea of lo yachal dvarei. When a person makes a neder a person speaks with his mouth and he makes a certain vow, we should keep it. Even though usually words don't have power, nevertheless, especially when it comes to kachim, a person should honor his words. And when it comes to a young girl, her father can intercede. The father can hear her make a vow and break it, which is called hafaras nedar. So the pasuk says, Veshoma Aviha Nidra, the father will hear his daughter make a vow and he will break it. Kiheini Aviha Isa means her father will disallow her making this vow. Now, what vows has to do with any of this, we'll see later. But let's get into the Maamar. Lahavin inyan digdukei sefer. Let's analyze the nuances, the exeris and the chumaris and the siyagim that the rabbis added. Sha'anurayim kemat, we see almost entirely. Shakala Talmud, all of the Gemara. Malei mehalacha, that's filled with laws. But many of these laws, or most of these laws, are not laws that interpret the Torah shebeksav, what we call deiraisis, but they're derabbanan. V'chumreis sheichmiru chazal, the strictnesses that were added by the rabbis. V'yisifu, as they added, Kama, Gedorim, Musyogim, Torah shebeksav, many criteria and fences to protect the Torah shebeksav, the scripture, the oral Torah. And again, in a nigla level, you will say, we have to keep Tayag mitzvahs. And we're afraid you're going to take a bite out of the mitzvahs themselves, so you make offenses. There's a famous story that they tell about a big tzaddik who came to town, and he was looking for a siddur with the kavanas of the Arizal, Kisvei Arizal. Nobody had the siddur with the Arizal's writings. Until they discovered there was a poshet of water carrier had the siddur with Arizal's Kabbalah all around. So he said to them, oh, you have no use for such a siddur. Give it to this tzaddik and we'll give you an ordinance. He says, no, I need it. He says, why? He says, I'm a poor man. I can never afford to buy another one. I bought a siddur where the siddur is in the middle and the comment is all around. That if it's going to fade, the commentary will fade, but the middle will always stay. If I give you this siddur and I get an ordinary siddur, I'll wear away the edges of the pages. I won't be able to read the words. I bought a siddur with so much commentary, so the principle will be preserved. That's a simple insight into how you understand the Chachamim. The rabbis made fences to protect the fruit, the essence of Torah mitzvahs. But Chapimiyas HaTorah doesn't agree with that at all. An idea which is added to Torah, which isn't from the Torah, isn't Torah at all. Every idea has to be Torah. The fact that it looks to us as a gezerah based on a fear, or based on a rasha, based on a pirza, that's its appearance on the outside. Everything is godliness. And we need to understand the criteria of what Hashem himself gave us in what's called the Torah shebeksav. And what Hashem didn't give us, and our rabbis, so to speak, squeezed it, they wrung it out, they sucked it out, the Torah that the Eibishter gave us, and revealed all these chumras. So he brings like this in line 3. The idea is as follows. Move on, kamesha kos for azal. It can be explained based on the medrash, based on the pasuk in Shirashirim. Ki tevim deidecha b'yoyin. You prefer deidecha to yayin, to wine. What does this mean? Ki tevim deidecha b'yoyin. So yayin, wine, is going to go on Torah shebeksav. And deidecha is going to go on Torah shebapeh. Says the medrash Omer Knesset Yisrael, the Jewish collective, which is Kabbalistically the source of all Jewish souls, said, Arev Himalai, it's more sweet and pleasant to meet. Divrei Seifim, the words of the scribes and the rabbis, Yesam Yena Shatera, even more than the wine, than the intoxicating part of the Torah, which is the Torah Shebeksav. And he interprets, Pirush Yena Shatera, what is the wine of the Torah? Hopnimius HaTorah, V'Seidah said, this is the inner dimension of the Torah and its secrets. The one drinks wine, a secret emerges. But when one drinks wine and a secret emerges, that secret could be nonsense. But when we're talking about the intoxication of Torah, the secrets that emerge are the secrets of the Torah itself. And nevertheless, divrei seifrim, the words of the rabbis are arevim, are more pleasant and sweet. Al Knesset Yisrael, to the collective Jew, to the source of the Jewish souls. Yeser miseides haTorah, more than the secrets of the Torah. And I'm going to pause right here. Why? The Eibishter gave us a Torah at Sinai. This Torah is the basis for all 613 mitzvahs. A part of this Torah is the yayin, the intoxicating part of Torah. Why would the chachamim, why would the rabbis add is considered superior to the yayin shel Torah? So he answers, Ki kol hagedorim v'achumres shebedivrei Razal, all these fences and all of these strictnesses, which are found in the rabbinic language, v'darkei musar, and the words of direction and a moral code, an ethical code, sheba agodes v'pirkei avos, found in the Midrashim and the Sefer and Mishnayos, called Pirkei Avos. Kulam nimshachem, they all are a symptom of mebechinas ahavah, an infinite love that Hashem has for the Jewish people. As the pasuk says, ahavti eschem amar avai, that Hashem says He loves us infinitely. So what's the Alter Rebbe saying? Alter Rebbe is saying like this: God has a relationship with us. That relationship can be defined in a number of ways. But one of the ways of defining the relationship between God and man is love. He loves us. So He can love us more and He can love us less. He can love us reasonably and He can love us super reasonably. What's the difference if the Eibishter loves us reasonably, rationally, or super rationally? The difference is very simple. If Hashem loves us reasonably, the gifts, the offerings that He gives us as a symptom of this love, will be reasonable as well. But if He loves us infinitely, the gifts, the offerings that He gives us on the basis of that love will also be unreasonable. So, on a reasonable level, He gave us a reasonable Torah. What's a reasonable Torah? A reasonable Torah is a Torah where you have panim and acher. There's a blend and a balance between the Ruach HaKodesh and the Seichel, between the Eid and the Seichel. You can learn Torah and you can understand it, and it's intoxicated, it's enriched, it's given so much meaning and taste and pleasure by the secret which is behind it. So, Nichnas Yayin, Yossi say, it goes on the secrets of Torah. But specifically, to use a Kabbalah word, it goes the secrets of Torah on the level of Bina, on the level of Ishtalshalus. It goes on the secrets of Torah that fuse with the ideas of the Torah in a balanced way. In other words, in the level of Torah Shebeksav, there's Ruach HaKodesh and there's Seichel, but there's room for both, because they're a symptom of a finite love. But when Hashem loves us infinitely, He gives us godliness where that balance does not exist, from a higher level. From a higher level, either we have only the godliness, or we have only the laws. Says the Rebbe, that's the Divrei Seifrim. Why, when you read what the Chachamim write, they seem to be so strict, and so exacting, and so precise, and so much of what they say seems to be based on such poor excuses. The reasons they made these decrees are oftentimes very remote. And the richness behind these decrees is even more remote than that. Because what's happening is God is giving us from His wisdom on a level which is higher than Atzilus. And as a consequence, all we have is the technical side of these laws and these chumras and these gedorim and these syagim and these takanis, and the oid is gone because it's higher than a level where there could be this balance. And that's the Alter Rebbe's interplay. The idea of Yeina Shal Torah is a level of Torah based on Avos Ha'olam, where there's an interplay between the Yayin, between the Pnimius and the Seichel, the Chitzenius. Ahavti Eschem Amar Hashem is an infinite love, and from the level of the infinite love, He gives us an infinite Torah. As we receive from that infinite Torah, it seems to be dry laws because the light is simply too potent to be able to reach us. And He gives an example. Kamei, for example, I'm on line 9. The Mashal Adam, a man, Machmas Avosei Abrei, loves his son very much. Medaktek Ime Yeser. He's especially particular about this child of his because he loves him so much. And he says 2 points. Number 1, to protect him, to guard him very much. Bisyagim ugedorim, with fences and criteria. As much as absolutely possible, bal korche, against the child's wishes. She should be pure. He wants to protect his child from hurting himself, so he puts up all these fences to keep his child in the straight and narrow. But there's a second idea. And the second idea is, v'chein, in addition, He has a great desire that this child should have a beautiful appeal, should be beautiful to others. So now it's not only a question about guarding him against hurting himself, this is a question of beautifying himself. For example, we have analogy, margolis, a pearl. The more precious it is, you guard it more, with a greater guarding, a vessel inside a vessel. But this is not about it's being corrupted. You're not guarding it so it shouldn't be hurt. You're guarding it simply because it's precious. Similarly in line 13, God Almighty loves us so much. And therefore, He's strict, in particular, upon us and all kinds of nuances of the rabbis. Because they're also part of his Torah, just like the original Sefer Torah, the Chumash, which is Panim and Achid is Torah say. And when a person learns Torah Shabbat, he's able to understand the mitzvahs and the halachas, to use the Kabbalah term on the level of Yechudim, to experience the interplay between the Panim and the Acharayim, the Seichel and the Chacham and the Eir. But when the Eibush gives us Divrei Seifrim, they come from the infinite love. And because they come from the infinite love, this balance does not exist. And as a consequence, we seem to get only the strictnesses, only the you can't do this, and you can't do this, and you can't do this, when in fact, the godliness behind all of these strictnesses is even higher than the godliness of Torah Shebiksav, Bisyogim Ugedorim, with fences and criteria, Lizakeseinu, to keep us pure, L'Teiv Lanu, for our best interest, Sheni Nikin Lefanav Yisbarach, we should be pure in the presence of HaKadosh Baruch. Hashem loves us so much, He wants to keep us even more pure. So He gives us all of these edicts. These edicts are not just boring defense mechanisms. They're deeply godly concepts that protect and guard and preserve. But the way it comes down to us in our experience is what you would call in this Maamar, Acher B'li Panim. While in Torah Shebeksav, the Acher and the Panim are linked. So we begin on line 17 Avihine. When there was a Beis HaMikdash, they didn't have all these enactments. Why? There's many reasons. But one of them is that our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu was reasonable. We connected to Him reasonably. He related with us reasonably. So the extent of the offerings and gifts from Him to us were reasonable. What's reasonable? That level of Torah, where the Yayin Shal Torah, the godness of Torah, and Seichel HaTorah interface with a good balance. Says the Rebbe, it was enough if they kept the Torah which is biblical, which is the Kabbalistic level of Atzilus. Our spirit, our will was loyal to God Almighty. And we did not allow the cords of love which we had to be misdirected or redirected. L'taivas gashmias, to meaningless physical pleasures and temptations. But rather, our love for HaKadosh Baruch Hu was so real. It was, relatively speaking, easy to have a love for God Almighty, kavua, fixed and planted. Believe, call ish, in the heart of each person, lihiyes, that we should be on a level of behislahavos lavei, a fire for the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and His Torah. There was no need for an infinite love. We didn't love Him infinitely because it wasn't necessary. He didn't love us infinitely because it wasn't necessary. And I'm sure you've heard the story before, that the Rebbe, who was the first chassid of the Frierdiker Rebbe, obviously, and he came running downstairs once from upstairs, and two Bachrim were standing at the foot of the stairs, and he tells them, Ich kom jetzt von Schwer, I'm coming from the previous Rebbe. And I just heard the Marganisa Tova, I just heard the Mahanemi, the Mal Yiseh, I just heard something very wonderful, I want to share it immediately. And he tells them that he had been getting, the Rebbe had been getting, a lot of pressure from Rabbonim. How come, in quotes, he's Makar Freya, he's involved with non-religious Jews, and he's embracing them, and he's being nice to them, and so on. You're not supposed to have anything to do with not religious people. And the Rebbe was asked this question many times. So finally, he decided to pose this question to the previous Rebbe, to his Rebbe. So he went upstairs, and he went into the previous Rebbe, And he proposed a question to him, and the Rebbe told him as follows. The nature of motherly love is that it's inexhaustible. The love that a mother has for children, the nature of it is that the more children they have, the love is not diminished. If you have one child, you love the child infinitely. You have two children, you don't split the love. You love both of them infinitely. You have three children, you love each one infinitely because the love is qualitative and inexhaustible. Having said that, if a mother has a child who's blind, if a mother has a child who's deaf, if a mother has a child who's a cripple, cannot speak, cannot walk. So even though the mother's love for each child is infinite, somehow the love that the mother has for this child is going to be special. And the Rebbe continued. The Eibishter loves every Jew like an only child. But when you have a child who cannot see, which means he doesn't know about the Eibishter. The child who cannot hear, which means he doesn't learn Torah. The child who cannot talk, it means he doesn't daven. The child is missing an arm, he doesn't put on tefillin. And the child is missing a leg, Rahman, he doesn't walk the shul. He says the love from the Eibishter to such a person is even more. And that's the Pshat Avarabba. When we are in a healthy condition, Hashem doesn't have to love us special, He loves us normal. Loving us normal is giving us a Torah where the interface between Panim and Achad is balanced. I'm on line 20, as time passes. As the number of souls that are whole and healthy in Avodas Hashem becomes diminished, and there is a breakdown of with loving Hashem very powerfully, like fire attached to a coal. But even this Ava Aza Kirish B'Yesh is a limited love, it's a Seichel Dika love. And in addition to the falling down of souls, there is also the secondary component. We were burnt by alien fires. In other words, we're distracted and preoccupied by physical pleasures. Says the Rebbe, when these pleasures have become so predominant upon us, we can't serve Hashem out of love because we're asleep. The reasonable relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the reasonable love, which is a symptom of our reasonable relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, has broken down. And therefore, Biltush and Neseirim is Avarabba. We have to have an infinite love. We have to express our need for HaKadosh Baruch Hu and dependency on HaKadosh Baruch Hu till He shows us infinite love. And we have to examine our own distance and our own pain from that distance, from Him, to bring out from within ourselves an infinite love. Avarabba. So as it turns out, Golus, in the second Beis HaMikdash, which is of course much lower than the first Beis HaMikdash, introduces all of these chumras and all of these diktukim. Why? We're on a lower level. And because we're on a lower level, Atzilus is not going to work anymore. Hashem is going to love us infinitely. So He's going to give us a higher Torah. But the higher Torah, as it reaches us, is missing the Pnimius altogether. Because on these highest levels, the Pnimius, Nachirayim, don't have the balance. Like I explained to you in my introduction. Ayadei digduke seifrim v'chumreim, to the nuances of the rabbis and their strictnesses, v'chol prateim, and all their particulars. Hey mebchines surmeran, staying away from evil. V'chol hachumres shebegimaro paskim, following all the strictnesses in the Gemara and the paskim. V'hein mebchines vaseitev, as well as doing good. V'divrei muster shebagodas emil diavis, following the rules of laws of ethics and good character found in Medrash and in Pirkei Avos. Ayin teiv v'sheyires chaveri b'teivayin, that a person should have a good eye and look at this person only with a good eye. And on the other hand, you should never think evil against your friends, like it's mentioned in the Geras HaKedesh, Simin Chav Gimel, Simin Chav Beis. V'chein leivtei, v'chavate, v'chulu, is a good heart and a good friend, and so on. These are not Tartei Shebeksav, they're Perei Shabbat. So the Rebbe says, what's the Taich Divrei Seifrim? That we come across tons of laws and edicts and details which seem so boring and disconnected. But first of all, they're Torah, they're part of the Ein Sof. Second of all, they're given to us as an expression of Avarabba. Hashem is protecting us because He sees the need for this protection. When we're compromised, we need greater love. But as it comes down to us, we have, in quotes, the boring Gezeda, the boring Chumrah, and not the details. I remember a story that happened with me, and I remember my reaction, which was not appropriate. I was on America Shlichus someplace. This goes back a long time. And we were sitting at a Shabbos table. And somebody mentioned the idea that with the minig Yisrael, that when you bench, you take the knife off the table. During the week, you have to take the knife off the table. Shabbos, you don't have to take the knife off the table. So there was a woman there who was a conservative woman, very, very proud. And she was trying to be respectful, but she found this to be terribly superstitious. Why do you take a knife off a table? So she said, it's only a minhag, it's only a custom. It's not a law. And I said, yes, it's only a minig, it's only a custom. It's not a law. And it's true, it's only a minig, it's only a custom, it's not a law. But it pained me very much that I allowed her to put minhagim in like a junk heap, a pile of ideas that were added on later on that are really not that important. Understand that Pnimiyas HaTorah makes the biggest issue out of minhagim. The Rebbe would so often quote a Tosfos that says minig Yisrael Teirahu, a Jewish custom is Teirah. And the Rebbe would explain a third dimension, which you don't even have in this Maamar. In this Maamar, you have two levels, Deiraisis and Derabbanans, biblical and rabbinic Judaism. So biblical ideas is where the interplay between Panam and Acharayim is more direct, that's Atzilus. Derabbanans, the interplay to Panam and Acharayim breaks down, so you only have the halacha, the ma'isa without the oyer, that's keser. Minig Yisrael is not from Teresh B'Ksav, it's not from Teresh B'Peh, it's from our neshama. And the source of a neshama is higher than Teresh B'Ksav and Teresh B'Peh. So we, in Chassidus and in Kabbalah, have a very different perception of these things. Any idea which is a Minig Yisrael is part of Teirah of the Eibishter. You don't see it, you don't find it. You think it was enacted because of some paranoia, because of some fear, because of a particular circumstance. But in reality, everything comes from Teirah. But the oyer and the seichel are so disparate, are so far apart, that it looks like only a minig. And this is what the Alter Rebbe's point here is, that ideas that are midrabanan have as much oyer or even more oyer than deiraisis. But in the way it comes on in the Rabbanan, the chum and the syag seems without light, because it's too far removed from the ponim and the achirayim, and these levels are more separated than it is in the world of Atzilus. And we continue on line 39. V'zeu shekosum, this is the meaning of the pasuk, Veshoma Aviha. A Jewish girl, that means a Jew makes a vow. And her father, which goes on chokhmah, and in this case goes on higher than Atzilus. Here's this nidra, here's this vow. Heini Aviha Oisa, her father prevents her from making it. Sheha'av meifir, that the father breaks this vow. Why? Ki mebechinas avarabba. He loves his child infinitely. He loves his daughter, the Jew, infinitely. And because the father, which goes on Hashem, loves the Jewish child infinitely, he breaks the vow. He breaks the limitation, so to speak, that Teresh B'Ksav by itself provides. Who mefer, he breaks it. Kitalgume mevatel, he breaks. Kolei surim, v'akishurim, all the prohibitions and all the knots. Asher Knesset Yisrael Yasura Okshura, that the collective of Jews, that every Jew is tied up and trapped in. Ve'enchavu shmater atzmei, and because we're trapped in all these things, we cannot redeem ourselves. Ki im aidei midas ahavarav, with an infinite love, bechinas aviyah, which comes from our Father. So the Rebbe quotes a pasuk, Veshoma Aviha es nidra, and explains that the father goes on the Yebishter, and the breaking of the vows, this is a symptom of the Avarah, which is very, very interesting. Very interesting. And to be sure, I think quite controversial when you learn more Maimorim on this week's Parsha. He's talking about a Foras Nedarim so far. Not a Torah, he's talking about a Foras Nedarim. And he says about a Foras Nedarim, that a Foras Nedarim, this is the Avarah. So without going into the questions and the pilpul, which we'll leave for the scholars, the Alter Rebbe is saying, here's a pasuk in Chumash that says, there's a Torah. And the Torah we have is Panav V'Acher, what he called before Nichnas Yayin Yatsa Seid. The Torah the Jewish people give in the Torah. And because of that Torah, there's certain limitations. In other words, when we're healthy, Hashem loves us. And loves us like a father loves a child, infinitely. But because we're healthy, our love for Him and His love for us is limited. And the Torah, the offerings we get from Him, are limited as well. And then the Father sees these limitations, and He expresses an infinite love to break those limitations. And what is the infinite love which the Father gives to break the limitations? This is the concept of Torah Sheba'al Peh. Now what does this mean? So from line 42 on line 59 is a parenthesis. We're not going to learn it inside. But in these, whatever it is, 16 lines or so, the Alter Rebbe is going to give two different explanations. For what does it mean? That Afaras Nedarim is a father showing an infinite love and breaking the constraints of being a Jew based on Torah Shebiksav, based on Avas Eilam alone. The first one is the first 6 lines from line 42 till 47, and then from line 48 till 59 is a second explanation. What's interesting here is that the Alter Rebbe gives two explanations, or the Tzemach Tzedek writes two explanations. For this, Heini Aviha Oisa, that are not just different, but they're on some level mamish opposites. Min hakotze lakotze. The constant in both is that the Alter Rebbe is interpreting this pasuk Veshoma Aviha as nidra, v'hefer as nidra, keheini Aviha Oisa, as being a father loving his daughter infinitely, rather than simply loving his daughter in a finite way. And therefore he's breaking down the limitations that his daughter was in based on a Torah, which is based on a finite love. The first explanation is that when you keep, let's say you live in the time of the first Beis HaMikdash, and you're keeping Torah Shebiksav, and with all the mitzvahs, and you don't have any of the chumas and the gedarim and so on and so forth, and you have this interplay between yayin, between pnimiyas HaTorah and chitzoniyas HaTorah, you encounter snags, sigim he calls them, obstacles. In other words, when you're serving Hashem based on a limited love, but a deep and experienced love, and you have the level of the Torah, the world of Atzilus, there are certain things about this Torah that are going to be not understood or not perfect. And Veshoma Aviha Nidra Vehefer means that the Eibishter gives us an Avarav, an infinite love, to perfect our performance of the mitzvahs of Torah Shebiksav. They should be the way they're supposed to be. In other words, the first idea of the infinite love is Hashem gives us a koyach from higher than Atzilus, that the mitzvahs we're doing on the level of Atzilus should be perfect. That's number one. And the number two, which is very interesting, is that Alter Rebbe is interpreting this pasuk not as hafaras nedarim, but hataras nedarim. This Alter Rebbe says inside explicitly, which makes sense, except that the pasuk of the Parsha is not talking about hataras nedarim. The pasuk of the Parsha is talking about hafaras nedarim. And to make a long story short, I'll explain this to you as concisely as I can. The Mishnah says in Chagiga that hataras nedarim is eisias perches ba'av ve'ein lo mashi yismeich. The Torah tells us all the laws of breaking a vow. But in no place does the Torah tell us the law of releasing a vow, of untying a vow. The difference between breaking a vow, which is called in Hebrew hafara, and releasing a vow, which is called in Hebrew hatara, is when you break a vow, it's mikan al haba. It's from now on. If I made a vow and I violated it yesterday, and today I break that vow, I'm still liable for yesterday's violation, because my breaking it is only from here on. But if I'm matened, that if I release the vow, I'm releasing it retroactively, as if I never made it in the first place. And therefore, even if the violation of yesterday goes away. So the Gemara says, the Mishnah says, Hafaras Nadarim is in the Chumash. Hataras Nadarim the rabbis thought of and has no basis in Torah Shebiksav. Eisias Perches Ba'avev Ein Lamashi Yismeich. So, on a simple level, that makes Hataras Nadarim deficient. But again, based on the idea that I shared with you before, if it's Torah, it's Ein Sof, and if it doesn't have a basis in Torah Shebiksav, it's because it's so much higher, it's strictly in Torah Sheba'al Peh. And the Shadish is in Keser, and so on. What's the pshat? So you have this many Maamar Chassidus. People make vows to protect themselves from themselves. Hashem gave us mitzvahs. We add additional mitzvahs to protect ourselves from doing an Aveda. But why do we protect ourselves? Because we're vulnerable. People make fences. People protect themselves. They're afraid they're going to fail. But what happens if you can empower a person not to be afraid that he'll fail? What happens if you give a person enough koyach that he shouldn't be vulnerable at all? Then the role is reversed. Dayach masha asra teira. Hashem gave you 630 mitzvahs. Anything which is not prohibited, you must partake of and must use in Avodas Hashem. Why are you adding extra strictnesses and depriving you of certain material things and depriving yourself of the opportunity of elevating those physical things. So Ataras Nadarim says what? Hashem said you can drink wine. You made a nizirus, a neder, never to drink wine. But when you're connected to a higher madrega, to the level of chachma, you have a koyach that the wine should not have an adverse effect on you, and then not only don't you have to keep the vow, it's better that you don't keep the vow because you have to use it for avodas Hashem. So what's the second pshat in Heini Aviha Isa? Hataras Nadarim. We make vows to protect the Torah Shebiksav. The Eibishter gives a koyach, which comes from the Rabbanan, to release those vows. The significance of releasing those vows is, first of all, we'll be able to elevate certain parts of the physical world that we were not until that point able to elevate. And second of all, it's because we're not vulnerable, we're not open to failing. So here's a Maamar, which explains the Rabbanan and says what? The Rabbanan really has a higher light. Come from a higher level of infinite love. But the light is hidden and all you have is the laws. And the Rebbe connects it to a pasuk in the Chumash, Torah Shebaksav, which he holds as a remez to this koyach of Chachamim to go higher than the Torah Shebaksav, and explains it in two ways. Number one, that the mitzvahs that we do on a level of Torah Shebaksav, which can have inexactnesses, should become perfect because of the Torah Shebal Peh. And number two, the chumras and the gezeres which we take upon ourselves because we're afraid and because we're vulnerable are lifted because we have a koyach from Torah Shebal Peh which protects us from making any mistakes.